Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vanessa Redman, and welcome to my talk on a good wording. It is a little too simplistic, but I feel like that there are just so many ways for an adversary to be able to get to a network, and it seems virtually impossible for defenders to be able to think and find every single node and be able to defend every single action and click that goes on. And so I think that it is an uphill challenge for defenders. And that's why I think that game theory in this discussion is so very important. So obviously everything that I've said so far is not groundbreaking, right? Like clearly there's an issue with defense, particularly on some of your smaller networks that have limited resources. And so, the classic question of, well, if we know that we need to do better, then why don't we? And that's when usually you see all the eye rolls, particularly on, by those active defenders that are looking at Wireshark every day as part of their job. It's not that easy, right? And if it was, we would probably already be doing it. And so to me, cybersecurity is kind of like that constant logic trap. Even if we did have the magic solution, there isn't enough resources. Businesses always have those kind of limitations. And often what you see is those top three that I have listed there: people, money, and time, right? I don't have enough people to be able to do that. Or we would have to implement this entire system and we don't have the budget for that. Or even if you did have those things, how are you going to dedicate the time? Because you already have workers that are probably, gainfully employed, right? You don't just have the time to just have them stop what they're doing and then do something completely different. And then the last one, I think, is one that not everybody considers that is a bit specific to cyber, and that's bandwidth. If you have something that is completely using up all the resources on your computer or the internet, if you're accidentally DOSing yourself, then you're totally blocking that availability piece of the CIA triad, right? And if your systems are not available and people cannot get online, especially if you're doing something like e-commerce or somebody that needs to get information, then you're not being able to do your job. And so it doesn't matter if you're defending everyone and nobody can get in, if even the legitimate people can't get in. So bandwidth is also a very important piece of those limited resources. So it's not possible to have a guard on every computer, especially like in person, on every network, watching every action. So the other side of that, the other challenge is nobody wants to completely overhaul an existing plan, right? Nobody wants to be like, well, I can't start from scratch. So you have to kind of evaluate and look at all of these things and recognize that this is a reason why we don't just all of a sudden just do better at security. It's a lot more complicated than that. And hopefully we'll try to address some of those issues. So the what if I told you slide. I am full of useless information. If anybody knows me, I always have some sort of trivia quip or what have you. And I did what if I told you, and I got a snicker to myself because I knew that there was like the Morpheus meme from the Matrix. And so I was looking to see which one I wanted to use, and it said, what if I told you that in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus never actually said, what if I told you? And I was both thought that was interesting for my trivia piece, but also very disappointed because then I didn't feel like that I could actually use that on the sheet, on the slide. So, but the whole purpose today is to show that game theory can really help you understand why you do what you do, and then why or how you can actually improve that. And the thing is a lot of what is going on network defense, a lot of what people out there are doing are valid things, right? Antivirus and signatures and those kind of things are important. I am by no means saying that you should stop using those. But when's the last time you really evaluated all the things that you're doing and really figured out why you're doing each of those? And um, from that, evaluated what's the next step to actually improve and move forward. And game theory is going to be able to help do a lot of that. So first things first is the definition, right? Now, I put this on here because if you were to just go and decide that you're going to research game theory, right, you're going to get a lot of these kind of wordy definitions. Game theory is the study of mathematical models to analyze interactions between parties to make strategic, optimized decisions. And yes, that is exactly what it is. But my attempt today is to not overwhelm with that kind of fanciful wording, and to really get down to brass tacks of what we're actually talking about here. Game theory is mathematically model based. I'm not a math person. I've never considered myself to be a math person. And so a lot of my research and reading books and white papers is sometimes it's very cumbersome because I'm going to show you how to solve this issue. And then it's this next 5 pages of math that not only do I not completely understand, but I really struggle to find applicability to. And so that's definitely a challenge when researching game theory for cybersecurity. But what we're talking about at this very moment, game theory has 3 main, you'll see 3 main words used in here: games, players, and playoffs. And games, it's kind of like the first step of Fight Club. Not really, but games, yes, even though you have game theory, within that you have games where actually those are the interactions between 2 parties. Those parties are referred to as players. They can be groups or they can be individual. And then you have the decisions that are made. Those are calculated into playoffs. So all we're talking about is a competition, not necessarily one in which, not what we think about when we think about, basketball or sports or something like that, but simply 2 parties participating and what those decisions are, and then determining what the most optimized decision is. Now, if you were to just do a quick, hey, Wikipedia, what are the list of games? This is an example of what you're going to see. There are lots of games out there. Like I talked about before, these games are scenarios to help solidify and kind of test what kind of principles we're talking about. And this is a subject that can go very much in depth. You can get in the weeds very quickly. I certainly have in the last 4 weeks or 4 years of doing research. But this is just to give you an example of some of the things that you can read up on. When you're doing that, you're going to find there's not a whole lot that mentions cybersecurity. And that's because game theory does not have its roots in cybersecurity. Instead, a lot of it was actually in economics. And so it might not be unusual that, or shouldn't be unusual that you haven't heard of game theory before, per se. It's not inherently a computer science subject. John von Neumann founded kind of the term game theory as a mathematical principle with a paper that he wrote in 1928. So we're not even talking about, we're just talking about last century. We're not even talking about papers that are even that old, especially when it comes to math. In the 1950s, John Nash, which you might be familiar with because of the 90s movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, in that picture there on the right, conducted and published research on game theory that actually won him the Nobel Prize in economics in the 90s. And so many of these games sound like what we would usually think of as logic puzzles. Take, for instance, probably one of the most well-known game theory games that's out there, which is the Prisoner's Dilemma. So a lot of you might be familiar with this, but we're still going to break it down and go slow with it, and to really get and understand the identification of all different options and then choosing what the optimal strategy is. So there's a lot of variations to this game. Some have different prison sentence numbers. I've seen it called the Peace War game. I've even seen it called the TCP game, as trying to take the same kind of strategy and apply it to cyber. So you might see various different stories that basically have the exact same principle. It was actually first presented in 1950, so around the same time that John Nash was writing his papers on game theory. And so I'm going to tell this story as if you are actually one of the players. And as I'm telling it, think about what you would do in this situation. I have seen this be presented at talks in which they actually asked people of the audience to come up and participate. I would encourage you to do that because it's really interesting to kind of see. I am fascinated by sociology, so it's really interesting to see how humans interact, even in a practice scenario like this. But for today and what we're talking about, you and your partner just robbed a bank. Sorry, I don't know why you did it, but you did. Several days later, both you and your partner are arrested and taken in for questioning. So the police know that you're guilty, but they don't exactly have the smoking gun. They don't have all the evidence to really be able to convict you. And so, you know, just like all the shows that you see on TV, they really need that confession. And they need it so bad that they're willing to actually bargain with you. The prosecution is willing to offer you a deal in order to be able to get a conviction. So that deal is, if both of you confess, then each of you will get 1 year in prison. If both of you stay silent, each of you will get 2 years in prison. And if one of you confesses and the other one stays silent, then the confessor will get set free. That's always cool. But the other is going to get 3 years in prison. So what are you going to do? Maybe your first thought is that, you know, you're not a snitch, right? You're not going to say anything, and neither is my partner. But then the paranoia sets in, right? What if it's just too enticing for them to be set free and they don't care? Maybe even the people that are interviewing you and investigating you are like, that partner doesn't care about you. They're ratting you out right now. What are you going to do? That's the prisoner's dilemma. And it's a great game theory example because it's simple enough to look at. Your options are to confess or stay quiet, right? And so you can identify every single option for you, but you can also identify every single option for your partner. And that takes out the guesswork of that emotional piece. Well, what are they going to do? You know, do they actually care about me? You know, we had a pact. Are they actually going to stick to it? And so you can draw out all of the solutions, and we're going to do that in what's called a payoff matrix. So here I've just drawn out in a simple table, these are all the options, right? You can confess, you can stay silent. Your partner confess, your partner can stay silent. So we'll fill in all of the spots of the actual, of all your options, right? If you confess and your partner confesses, you see each of you are going to serve 1 year. If you stay silent, but your partner confesses, then you're going to prison for 3 years, but your partner is going to be set free. And then you see it's how it works. If you confess, but your partner stays silent, then you're going free and your partner gets 3 years. And then if both of you don't say anything at all, both of you are going to serve 2 years. How does that look like that from a mathematical model perspective? Now, I'm showing you this because if you go through and you research different matrices in game theory, often you're not going to see everything spelled out like you see here. Instead, you're going to see numbers like this slide shows. And it's a simple way of being able to see exactly what is in your best interest. Now, these numbers here correspond to the actual prison numbers. What you might see in others, if it's simply a yes advantage, no not advantage, neutral, you might see just a 1, 0, and -1 to indicate those things. But these numbers here, specifically, since we have numbers for the prison sentence that correlate with the prison sentence, then we put those numbers here. So it's the exact same thing. In that first area, you confess, your partner confesses, each serves 1 year. That's going to be a -1, right? That's not a positive, it's a negative. So that is shown here as both of you have a -1. You stay silent and your partner confesses, then yours is 0, right? You get to go free, but your partner is -3, so on and so forth. So it gives you that number basis, that nice, easy way to try to see what what you should do in this situation, right? So if you're looking at this, yes, 0 is very enticing. Yes, you definitely want to get sent home, but there's no way that you can guarantee that your partner isn't going to confess. And so when you're looking at what your options are, -2 definitely looks better than -3, right? 2 years in prison is better than 3. So I could just stay silent, but how do you know they're going to stay silent? So then you start looking at, well, if they're going to confess, I'm going to confess. So I have 2 options if I confess, right? I have the potential of being set free, which is 0, which is awesome, or I have -1 because my partner also confesses. So no matter what, and no matter how we feel like that we're never going to be able to, we shouldn't rat out our partner and we should be quiet. When it comes to this particular bargain scenario, it is in our best interest and in our partner's best interest to both confess and serve 1 year. So that's probably one of the most well-known game theory games that's out there. Let's look at one more that is more geared towards cybersecurity. And this one, you know, the prisoner's dilemma has been around since 1950, right? You've had decades of people being able to go through and basically tear it apart and prove and disprove and write papers about it. Flip It is a lot newer. This was first published in 2012, and I only became acquainted with it last year when I gave a talk on it in B-Sides. It was really interesting to me. I put the quote in here of exactly what the author's rules are. And essentially, you're playing a blue player. And as a blue player, you want to be able to control the red player. And you can do that by playing a flip game in which you gain control at any time. And we'll be able to go through this and show essentially, like I put the Schrodinger's network on here because you're being kind of attacked and defended at the same time, right? The cat is both dead and alive in the box. You don't know if you're being attacked or not. And so you have to kind of check on this network. But when you do that, you're using up resources. And so in this particular game, it lasts 10 seconds, and the goal is for you to have more points than the red player. The reason why that this is good is because a good example of game theory and its application in cybersecurity is because it's really going to help you visualize the challenge of that ghost in the network. And this is really particularly good for application with advanced persistent threats, or APTs. One of the things that I'm hoping that as a cyber defense culture that we can move forward on and accept is that we should assume compromise on our networks. We're no longer in a defensive world where we just have to worry about our firewalls, and as long as we prevent them from getting in, then we are good to go. That is not the state of affairs anymore. And so this game really helps to show, what do you do when you don't know if someone is in the network, but you feel like that you need to assume that. How are you checking your resources to make sure that you have control of that network? So like I talked about before, the goal here is to maintain control over your network using the least amount of resources. You receive 100 points for each second that you're in control. However, you lose 100 points when you have to check and defend your network. And when you click flip, you are simulating both checking and defending your network. So we're going to test this out here. This is available on GitHub. I'm going to pull it up for you now, and we'll play this game to get an idea of what we're looking at here. So the instructions are all here. It's very basic. Like I said, it's on GitHub. It's free, and you click start. Here's your bar, and you are playing the blue player, and you are going to click flip every time you feel like that you need to check on your network to make sure that you still have control. So we'll go through, and let's start it off. So we're flipping. You see in the blue here, we still have control. We're flipping. Oh, now red had control for a while, but we took it back. Oh, they got in 4 more times. And so we're checking through, but every time we click flip, we're losing points. So in the end, we had control for most of that network, right? We won the game. We did awesome. Let's think about if we wanted to kind of defend all the things all the time, right? Then we're always clicking that flip button. Yep. Oh, see, they were on for just a little bit, and now they're not, but we're checking. Oh, we're still good at that, but look at what's happening to my score in the upper right-hand quarter. I'm in the negatives, right? That's because this is not realistic to how we would actually defend our network. Nobody has the resources to be able to check these things constantly like that. And so even though we defended our network very well and red had very little control of our network, we actually lost in the end because of our resources, our resource usage. And so I feel like that this is a really good game to really outline some of those challenges and put it in a visual way. Because some, especially in leadership, some of your top leadership might not understand why you can't defend all the things at all the time, you know, that perhaps some intrusions are going to be inevitable. And so we have to look past that and move on from that and see what we need to do next. So that's what a lot of these lessons that I listed here really show. In the white paper in which the authors presented Flip It for the first time in 2012, they listed 3 main lessons of Flip It. The first being that systems should be designed under the assumption of a repeated total compromise. And I think that is definitely valid in today's state of affairs. 2, aggressive play by one player can motivate the opponent to drop out of the game. So this is something of why Flip It can be important, right? If there's constantly somebody on the network and they see that, then that can act as a kind of deterrent. It's kind of like putting the security cameras out in front of your home, right? If a would-be robber comes by and sees that the house is being surveilled, maybe they're less likely to go and surveil or rob that house because maybe there's one just right down the road that doesn't have any cameras. And so it's an easier grab, right? So that is something that that you have to balance as far as having that aggressive play so that it can be used as a kind of deterrent. And 3, close monitoring of one's resources is beneficial to detecting potential attacks faster, gaining insider strategies, and scheduling defensive moves more effectively. So another plus for why close monitoring can be useful and very important. And so that's a gist of what we went over today for game theory. Like I said, it's an extremely thorough subject. You can be looking at hundreds of papers if you wanted to on what people, how people can apply theory, game theory, and you see plenty even now, especially in the 2000s, you see a lot more papers in which game theory is trying to be used in cybersecurity. Game theory, a lot of times people think of as war strategy, and that's not completely incorrect. It is a kind of war strategy. And so the purpose here is to train your mind to think about your opponent, kind of like in the prisoner's dilemma. You have your options on what you're going to do, but what about your opponent? What is and in the prisoner's dilemma, your partner is your opponent here. What is your opponent going to do? As a red teamer, I often got to actually go to a customer's workspace and talk to them and ask questions as part of their training. And I would ask, what is the most vulnerable path in your network? And most didn't necessarily know the answer because they're thinking about all the defenses that they have. Well, we use this, and we have an entire team that's looking at these logs, and they're always thinking about the way that traffic should work. And because of this, they tend to be a bit blinded on the way traffic could work and could be manipulated to bypass defenses, because they're only looking about what they know about the network and not anticipating any of the unknowns, which is something that an adversary on the network is absolutely looking at. And so this is exactly why game theory is so important. At the end of the day, though, network defenders can't just all of a sudden flip the game theory switch into their network closet and be all knowing, right? It's so much more complicated than that. And that's also a primary challenge of game theory. At the end of the day, it's in the title. It is theory. It is a mindset. It's a way to strategically think about problems. And given that the foundational theory of game theory was rooted in economics, it's even more difficult for computer scientists to actually apply some of these really juicy insights on game theory. Flip it shows some of the challenges. You're like, awesome. So what do I do about that? What's next? And for a lot of people, the what are you going to do about it is more antivirus and updates, right? And this is good. Please don't take at the end of the day, oh, my signatures are something that I don't need to do and they're outdated. That's absolutely not the case. But I do think that it is a gear towards reactivity, being reactive instead of being proactive. And so for game theorists, what I want to do is actually postulate about what our opponent is going to do, figure out those knowns and unknowns, and then figure out exactly what we need to do. So what are some of our knowns? Network traffic flow is definitely one of the knowns. OSI model, it's kind of like an airplane in the sky. You have certain fundamentals of what makes that plane fly. Those are knowns. And so you know that you're within the bounds of like physics, for instance. And the same is the case with network traffic flow. You're thinking about it in a game like chess. What are some of the other knowns? You've got the board, right? An 8x8 space board. The network is your board in this case. So understanding all of the network topology is extremely important. The other thing is, I would love to ask an operator about their defensive systems. They would enthusiastically tell me about all of these bells and whistles. And then I would say, well, how do you know that those things are reaching every single computer on the network? Or I might ask, how old are your network maps? And those are very uncomfortable questions to ask because most people don't know those answers. And so that is another one of those unknowns that when you're looking at all the options and decision points, these are questions that you have to ask because I guarantee you that your adversary that's trying to get on your network knows the answers to those questions, even if you don't. So know your terrain, your capabilities, your network, and all of your options. And to the very last point here, the note of your best solution could still be a losing one. Game theory is not, this is the way that you're going to win all the time. Instead, it's an evaluation of all of your options so that you can be the best at decision making. It might be after an attack, an intrusion, that your best solution is still a losing one at the end of the day. But maybe you're reducing the risk as much as possible. You're suffering the least amount of losses in that scenario. So game theory is still important there. Just keep in mind that it might not be a winning or dominant strategy. It just might be the best one for the situation. So from here, we're going to move forward and move towards moving target defense. Now, Often when you read about defensive strategy and maybe even game theory strategy, you often will come across moving target defense. And that's why the second part of this presentation is that game theory, I caged is this very broad thing, right? And then if you distill that and bring it down, then we're going to be talking about the next stage, which is moving target defense. And it's kind of become a buzzword a bit in the 2000s. You can see it as a couple of different names. Some call it active defense, some call it asymmetric defense, but the principles are still pretty similar. The idea is that you're changing the known attack surface to confuse adversaries. And one of the reasons why I really like what this looks like and why I actually titled my talk today on Cyber Zigzag is because I think about this like an old 80s horror movie, right? And I love like terrible 80s B movies. They just, I don't know, they're just so fun to watch. And inevitably, you always have this person that's being chased. You've got the serial killer in the back, and they're running through the woods, and they're just running in a straight line. And you're like, oh, you're getting angry, you're yelling at the TV, and you're like, zigzag, duh, you know, like bob and weave, you know, because it seems so obvious, right? And moving target defense is that kind of zigzag that we're talking about. So the one of the main purposes here is essentially is you're making the hunt harder. And again, this is a definition by Homeland Security. So again, you're going to get one of those definitions that's very wordy and says a lot of things, but I've highlighted what I consider to be the main parts here, which is moving target strategy or moving target defense is controlling change to increase uncertainty and apparent complexity for attackers. Now, what I like about this is what we talked about a little bit about reducing that window of opportunity, right? It's part of it is the cameras in front of your building to show that, yes, you have a robust defense strategy. When we're talking about moving target defense, we're talking about changing things that for most businesses or people, if an adversary was to do some recon, these would be very static things that you would always be able to see. And you're changing those. So when they have their game plan of what they're going to do, and they have this list of IP addresses, and then they go to execute, maybe they're not able to actually do what they need to do because maybe those IP addresses have changed. And so that's really at the heart of what we're talking about. If any of you are unfamiliar with one of the first stages of that hacker methodology or attack methodology, recon is one of the most important pieces to that. And so I would encourage anyone to do a little bit of open source intelligence or OSINT on yourself, do some fingerprinting and find out what is available for people to see, maybe people that you don't want to see your network, what can be found just maybe doing a Google search, doing a who is, looking at web archives, you know, looking at the Wayback Machine. I think that it's interesting the Wayback Machine can be used. Think about if the first time a company made a website and they realized that maybe their index was showing and it showed all of their server files and all of that. But then later on, they saw that it was a mistake and they fixed that. Well, if that's a cached website, it's possible that you can go to the Wayback Machine and you can find an actual cache of those same addresses that aren't forward facing anymore, that you can't see on the internet, but those things are still the same. So you could still use that information. Shodan is also a very interesting website to be able to go through and see those IP addresses. It's become kind of infamous because plenty of people have exploited seeing baby cams and things of that nature on Shodan. And then fingerprinting, have one IP address in your network and ping it, do a trace route, see where everything goes, see where all the ports that you have open. The picture that I have here is a free tool, and I have it on my references slide called Advanced Port Scanner. And look at all the juicy information that it gives. It shows you IP addresses, it shows you MAC addresses, what your operating system is, the ports that are open. This can all be extremely valuable information for someone that wants to get in your network and exploit your network in some sort of way. And so part of that moving target defense is what I was talking about before of thinking like an adversary. You know that first step is recon and the importance of recon. So do some recon on yourself. What can you find there? What is something that day in and day out, that who is record doesn't get updated very often. Plenty of people never change anything on their domain name registries. So that's static information that can be used as a foundation for an exploit. So what are we going to do about that? Age-old question, right? This is a website that I found. It's an article in Network World, and it really breaks down, I think, very well some of those deception techniques used by defenders. And that can be broken down into network, firewall, or IDS, host, and operating system. And keep in mind here that a lot of these you might not be able to change. You're not going to go through and change your operating system on all your computers, right? But you might be able to obfuscate that information so it has less information. And even if this is kind of an overwhelming subject, there are services that are specializing in this as we move forward and as it becomes a popular subject. I would always encourage anyone to look at GitHub, get an account, look at what some of those open repositories are. And then there are some places, the Morphosec is an actual commercially available product, and they're going to do a lot of that changing up of some of that static information for you and reduce some of that legwork. So now, towards the end, we have homework. I don't know why I sound so enthusiastic, maybe because it's supposed to be an exaggeration of what is not very exciting. But we've talked about generally about game theory. We've dug down a little bit, some intermediate stuff with moving target defense. And so the advanced piece to this is threat modeling. And that requires a lot of research and a lot of recon, but you can do things that can help you automate some of the things that you find that is threat specific. And one of the best ways to be able to see that is through the OWASP Top 10. And there's even Microsoft does a threat modeling tool. So I encourage some research in that. And then for the future, we've got Q learning. Now I'm a super nerd, obviously. And when I'm talking about game theory, there's algorithmic game theory. And so this is an even deeper subject on being able to use AI to enhance policies through algorithms. So we've talked about a lot of stuff, right? There's probably a lot of synapses going on, a lot of information. But we talked about game theory. I showed you a couple of games, Prisoner's Dilemma and Flip It. Then we dug into some moving target defense. And then we touched on a couple of really advanced subjects of threat modeling and learning. This is my references of a lot of stuff that I used when presenting this, and I can definitely give this out to anybody that would like it. And thank you very much for this presentation, for letting me present this information to you that I find very interesting. Please look me up on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and let's talk about this some more. Thank everybody for your time.